Are you creating content with the hope that someone's going to become a customer and hire you for electrical services? Hi, I'm Justin Hitt with Commercial Electrical Profits. Unfortunately, a lot of electrical contractors are being conned into creating content in order to potentially get customers. So they're promised customers. If they just create it, someone will come. It doesn't work that way. First off, for electrical services, you've got a number of different types of decision makers. You've got the homeowner. You've got the building owner. You've got the procurement manager. You've got the government official that might be considering a project and they're working on a bid system. You've got direct buyers who are working on a husband and wife decision. You've got homeowners associations. It just goes on and on. And if you were to create content for each of those audiences, you're going to blow your brains out trying to keep up with the changes in needs. The volume of content just wouldn't be there. Now, I don't want to discount the value of content. There are opportunities using what's called direct response marketing to go straight to decision makers with content of value that creates customers. And in the industry, there's usually called white papers. I call them special reports. But they tend to be buyer's guides of some kind that help a decision maker make the right decision about a solution. So for example, if you're targeting waste to energy projects, so these are $1 million plus projects, the waste to energy project is going to have decision makers such as a facilities manager, such as a local city council. It might have a utilities board. You can create a report for each of those individual audiences. Now, the report might go over the same safety factors to consider, efficiency ratios to consider. It could go over the same types of details, but it will always have a cover letter or some kind of introduction specific for that decision maker. The 15 things that procurement managers need to know when investing in support services for a waste to energy plant. The 12 things that every city should know about their sewage treatment plant that's costing them money. These reports need to be specific to the decision makers, but ultimately about 80% of the content is the same. Now, if you create that and put it online, there's no real way to know who is checking out that material. And in fact, when people look at research material online, they tend to be a little bit more casual about it. But instead, if you're holding conferences and you're holding webinars and you're providing DVDs to decision makers, you're offering reports, they'll tend to take that a little bit more seriously. One example is the Petroleum Council in Hampton Roads area, Clean Cities Coalition. We actually did a series of programs on biodiesel. Now, I was representing a petroleum distributor, and we ended up doing a number of programs on biodiesel, and I wrote a report about how biodiesel impacts engines, because that was the big concern. This bus company wanted to switch from diesel to biodiesel, but there was a concern that the biodiesel wouldn't work well in their engines. So I interviewed them, I went through all the details, and we wrote an authoritative report about the impact it was kind of an impact assessment of biodiesel in their school buses. It turns out that the problems with biodiesel were primarily natural rubber seals, and if you change those out for a synthetic, it pretty much ran the same, or if you ran B85 or something like that. But we basically did a road show with this information. I made the customer a celebrity. I said, look, they've got 72 buses. They've solved this problem. If you've got 8 trucks and you're worried about what biodiesel is going to do to your 8 trucks, and these people who have 72 trucks are not worried, well, guess what? There's something wrong. Get this special report. It'll answer your common questions. And by the way, we can come out and do an assessment. That's what the report offered. It offered an site assessment, and it talked about the money-saving opportunities, what kind of changes there might need to be. It kind of went through a checklist. You can do the same thing in the electrical contracting world. It is actually more valuable to do that on a person-to-person basis or through a report that is delivered physically to the other individual, because when you get online, simply search waste to energy. If you search for waste to energy options, you're going to find volumes of information that's diverse, it's all over the place, and none of it is specific to a procurement manager. Nothing is specific to a facilities manager. Nothing is specific to the operators or the decision makers who will be influencing your ability to do this job. Now, your manufacturers are going to have a lot of this information. Your technicians will have some of this information. What it takes is putting that information together in an easy to follow report specific to the audience. Now, when I say report, I know you're thinking about a book report from high school or college. You're thinking about the written exams or something. I'm talking about a 4 to 8 page briefing that helps that decision maker get started in the right direction to choose the right solution for their facility. So it would be 15 mistakes waste energy facilities managers make. It could be, if you're talking about commercial lighting, for example, 15 commercial lighting mistakes that always cause rework. You basically listen to your customers, anything that they're complaining about would make a great report. One client was working on an electrical rewiring for a manufacturing facility, and the original plans in the RFP wanted permanent wiring in a sense, where the new technology or the new resources available would allow a grid-based wiring. Now, it's more upfront, but the manufacturing facility had a lot of on-demand setups. So they would roll equipment around and maybe set up an assembly line for a short run, and then they would roll that equipment someplace else and set it up for a different run the next month. So what they really needed was a grid of 3-phase wiring and regular, actually 3-phase and some 220. They basically needed flexibility. Now, their RFP didn't ask for flexibility. Now, ideally, you want to get in early and provide one of these reports so that you can help them write the RFP. I've actually been paid to write RFPs for jobs that my computer consultancy actually got. And believe me, anything's possible. But here's the deal. The solution that was best was to have a grid spacing of the 3-phase specialty wiring and the regular wiring in such a way that the regular extension cords could be pulled down and plugged in. They had a post that you could put in so you could run it down the post and secure it properly. And then under the floor, there were several places where you could plug into the higher voltage, the higher conditioned wiring. This allowed the company to roll their equipment around anywhere. They could do very flexible manufacturing and have the right power, and no longer did they need to have cords run across the floor. No longer did they have to worry about not being able to put a piece of equipment in close proximity to the other equipment that's being used. It transformed the way that they did their workflow. Now, for the electrical contractor, this was like common sense. It's like, put in a few extra, that way you can move the equipment around any way that you want. The design actually came from very old thinking that all the power needed to be on the walls or all the power had to be in the floor. And to meet them in the middle, you take that experience, you build it into a case study. Then you take that experience and you list out all of the mistakes. And then finally, you end the report off with some opportunities. What's the next step? What do you need to consider and look for? And who do you call to get answers? Now, they took that grid-based system and documented it and ended up publishing it as a small report that was available to their existing clients. So they basically went to all their manufacturing clients and said, hey, look, we wrote up this report. It solves a lot of the major problems that we know manufacturers are facing, and we just want your feedback. Now, their customers tore that report up. Now, some of them loved it. Some of them had feedback and questions. Some of them just passed it around and got a lot of feedback from people who weren't the intended audience. But that gave valuable insights to rewrite the report and then write some supplement materials to then provide to a larger manufacturing base. So they were able to get more customers out of this. Now, you might be saying, Justin, I'm not a publisher. Justin, I'm not in the business of writing documentation. I basically take the documentation the manufacturers give us and pass it to the customer. Well, I want to argue that you can get more customers if you at least become the helpful guide that translates this technical material from the manufacturers into easy to follow materials for decision makers. Now, later, you might create quick, brief usability work. So, for example, an organization that doesn't have the mindset that you can just pull power down from the ceiling, You might have to explain how that works because you don't want to have all those power cords hanging down. You don't want to, of course, overload the extension cords. And then also your facilities managers are going to have a little bit different inspection when it comes to looking at those units. And then if you have specialty wiring in the floor, you just can't go mop the floors. You have to be aware. So it required paint markers and things that the electrical company didn't do, but they ended up partnering with a safety company that would come in behind them and do some of that. So I'm not saying you have to be a publisher. I'm not saying you have to write a book, but at least take your performance notes and take your notes about the customer's concerns and compile them into easy to follow briefings. These briefings might just be a simple checklist. But over time, you're going to build these out into manuals. You can actually have them printed very nicely. And sometimes you might become the industry standard of such type of installation. But the most important thing is that print material or that DVD demonstration, throwing it on the internet doesn't guarantee your audience is going to see it. But you can send a letter to somebody and offer them this report, and then it's an impressive kit to receive. So I actually saw one, I didn't have anything to do with this, but when a customer requested information about premise wiring, there were these new coax cable, Ethernet cable, and power all in the same box. Now, it wasn't really all in the same box, but the panel had power on one side, and it had the electronic connections on the other side. So this is like audio-visual type of stuff. It was installed by an electrical contractor who also then partnered with a media company who set in like the overhead projectors and set up the computer side. I was actually doing some of the IT work as a sub to the AV company. But basically, this electrical contractor made a lot of money doing this drop. So what they did is they partnered with the AV company and created a marketing box. And the marketing box would be called like a shock and awe box today, using Dan Kennedy's type of language. He's a marketer who helps companies grow. Ultimately, what they did is they included a couple brochures about the different types of AV solutions and AV communications or connectivity solutions, as well as their pros and cons. They included a sample of the old type of boxes because they're actually removing the old boxes from facilities, along with a small little report, maybe 4 pages, that listed all the problems with the existing systems because one of their objections was, hey, we already got a system in place. Well, it was usually like a DB25 serial, low voltage, no power anywhere near where you need it. It was in the wall rather than in the floor. But long story short is they were removing these boxes for clients and replacing them with the new modern modular system. And so they actually had a bunch of these boxes, didn't know what to do with them. So they actually put them in the kit. So they write a little 4-page report that explains all the problems with this current systems and shows them with a box. Okay, and sometimes they put numbers on it, sometimes they didn't. But here's the deal. That also included a mistakes guide and a checklist to get started, plus a letter that set an appointment where both the AV guy and the electrical guy was there to close the deal. This shows up in a priority mailbox, okay? They pull it out of the priority mailbox. They open it. It's a lot of stuff to play with, okay? They get to look at it. They get to touch it. They get to ask questions. They get to pass brochures around the office. Every brochure had the name of the electrical company because eventually the AV company pooped out. Eventually the AV company wasn't available. They went out of business. So the electrical contractor at least equipped himself to do the low voltage wiring, to do the specialized electric wiring, because in some of the hospital installations, the electric needed to be backup generator. The generator was on the building. They didn't want their AV or fancy projectors and cameras and stuff to fail if we had a power outage, so they need to have conditioned power. They got into portable solutions a little bit, only to the point where they had a couple packaged portable solutions, and they primarily focused on that inside wiring. They added that as a value add to their lighting environment. So if they're going to do a projector system in an environment, they're going to get a projector kit from somebody. They're not actually going to be putting in a projector, but they would make sure all the premise wiring is in place, all the low voltage wiring is in place. The lighting system was correct. that they can dim the lights if it was that type of environment. You had different segments of lighting. They made sure that there was enough power into a conference room, so they would get in and do a conference room job, and really do a full service for the customer. But it didn't matter if they had the specialty contractors. They could partner with the ones that the company already used, or they could bring in their own. But the key premise is their salespeople were now sitting down. Their one salesperson, by the way, was now sitting down with qualified prospects that had a big, giant box full of stuff that helped them make a good buying decision. So they didn't have to educate the customer when they got there. They could simply go and visit the conference room and talk about the problems. The customer already knew the problems. They were, of course, closely reliant to common objections. And finally, the reports inside the materials, even though they weren't very long and they weren't sophisticated or anything, really helped justify what the decision maker wanted, because in this environment, a hospital or a business, they don't always, the person who asks for the thing doesn't always make the final decision. So you've got preconditioning on the final decision maker before you even show up on site about why your solution is better than another solution. Now, this does work easier when you packaged your products. So you're not just an electrical contractor, you have specialty installations. And this also does work very well if you're willing to do the interviews or the video or the audio, because you can gather that information faster and then hand off the videos to somebody else who writes the reports. So you need to be able to write the outline at least, and the key points that are important to a customer, and then answer those questions in video. But you don't need to be doing it every day on the internet and putting it out in front of just anybody. It is confusing for a decision maker to show up on your site and find information for a procurement manager when they're a facilities manager. It is always easier to go directly to the facilities manager and offer them exactly what they want, and then within those materials, offer them a way to get what they want as well. If you have questions about this or anything else we share, I'm Justin Hitt with Commercial Electrical Profits. You can visit us at www.commercialelectricalprofits.com. This is a powerful way to turn your knowledge into customers, and to do so in a way that scales so well. And I hope you try this by simply writing down the common mistakes that your customers make before choosing your solution, and then going directly to some prospects who might potentially make those mistakes and how you can help them not make those mistakes. Thanks for listening.